So today we're getting started with state management in React. So we finished with the forms, classes, things like that. This whole section, this whole week is about state management. So we'll start with something called context API, or now there it's called context only. So context API, let's see what it is. So in your typical React application, state is passed top down, parent to child via props. But this can be very cumbersome quickly, especially when those props are required by many components across application. However, with the introduction to React Context API or context now, you no longer have to pass props down from component to component. So what the React dev team, they call prop drilling, basically passing props from the top to all the way down. We can now use a data on context object and retrieve the data in necessary components from the context object. So basically what this is saying is we're doing props. So whenever you are doing normal React application, so far what we were doing, we were using props. So for example, if I do some drawing, for example, we had the app.js here, right? And app.js has some state, it has some state, and we want to send this state to other components. So to do that, you have to pass it through props, right? If you don't have context API or if you don't have other systems, which we will learn another time, then you have to pass it through props. And props only pass things, especially state, through from up down. So you cannot pass a state from here to all the way up here, or you cannot pass it across to another app. So what do you have to do if you want to pass this from here to this? Is you have to disconnect from here and take this and connect it to here, and then make this one a child. Then you could pass it down. That's the only way. So that's so far that's what we did. We passed props from one component to another component. Sometimes you have to pass it through three components, 1, 2, 3, which gets really tiring. For example, imagine there is about like 100 components in an app, which actually happens. Actually, I do have a application right now that has over like 100 components in the application, and it's a React application. So it would have been really difficult if I was using props. So I'm using something similar to what we're learning today, but a little more advanced. So that's what we're avoiding. This is what we're avoiding, and this is what we don't want. So we don't want this, right? So here is kind of like a comparison between the way we were doing, which is props here to the left side, and here to the right side is context. This section you see, this background section you see, is the data. So this is the data. You can see here the data. So in the context API, any component can use the data. You don't have to pass it through another component. So you could store the data in this component, and then you could use it in here. You could use it in here, and not use it here in these child components. But as you can see here, when you're using props, you have to have the data in the top component, and then you pass it down like that. So that's the problem it's trying to solve, context API. So today in our objective, we will describe what context API is, which we just did, and the problem it solves, which we just did. It solves this prop drilling problem. You should be able to provide data to a component tree with a context provider, which we will do. You should be able to consume data from context object in a nested components, which we will do. All right, so let's see. So we talked about this. And this is example. Okay. So let's go to the context API website. So it's right here. Now it's called just context. And this is what React is saying about it. Context provides a way to pass data through a component tree without having to pass props down manually at every level. So that's the kind of like the description of it. So when to use context, that's really important. When to use context, when to use props. Usually you want to use context or context API when you have a lot of components. If you have like 3 components, or if you have like 5 components, even if you have like 10 components, you're fine. You can still use props, you'll be fine, depending on the project. But if you have over like 20, 30, 50 components, then it will be really difficult to use props. So that's when you use it. So context API is considered as like global level, kind of like a component, data sharing system. So there's 2 types. There's the level of component level. We call it component level state, component level, and that will be props. So I should use a different color. And then there is the global level. Oh, that's the field. Never mind. Keep changing the color, but it's not changing it. There is the global level. Global level. These are the two ways of sharing data through React. So global level will be like context API, context, and then there's one that we will learn called Redux. So context is a little bit less effective than Redux. Redux is used for like much bigger applications. Context is used kind of like a mid-level kind of applications. So that's when you use a context API. All right, so we kind of talked about what it is. There's a lot of information about context API, what it is, all that stuff. So you could, Google it, you could search it, you'll find a lot more information about what exactly it is. So we will practice it. So today we're actually building, we have a project that's already built. So this project, it's a family tree project. So what we're doing today is, this is already in props. So we're using props to render this. So if we click a family, you can see the family comes, the family parents and the children, and you'll see here the family, parents, and then the children. So what are we going to do is, now we're using props, we have to convert it to context API. I don't know what happened to this picture, but we can look at it. So we go here, data. Yeah, some pictures broke or something like that. That's fine. It's one of these, this one, Sasha. Yeah. Okay, so let's get started. Let's get started with the project. Let's see what it is. So these are the files that we have. So we have now, we have the CSS here. So this is actually SAS, CSS is a different type of different way of writing CSS, which you can learn. We have the index, which is the basic stuff. We have data, which has families information. So here is a family name, the parents, and then the children. So it's like a nested objects. So we have an array with an object, and then inside it we have another array of parents, and then we have another array of children. So that's the data we're going to be using. And then the app.js right now is a basic app.js. There was a problem last time when we did this. You guys had a hard time understanding one section of here, so we'll go through that. So app.js. So app.js, basically we're importing the the family tree component, which is right here, and then the CSS, and also the data that we're trying to use. And then we created an state which keeps track of the data for us. And then we create another state which keeps track of which family is active. So when I say which family is active, I mean when you click this, which family is shown right now. And then we loop through families, which is our state, our data. And then we used a button, which is this one. This is the button, this button. We use the button to check which family we're actually looking at. So this button is, last time you guys had a hard time with understanding how this button works, but I actually tried to make it easier, but then I didn't have enough time to refactor it. So this button, basically what it's doing is, let me just align this. We have a class here, and the class has a family button class, right? And that's part of the CSS. And then we used JavaScript here. We said we said here if family dot family name is equal to active dot family name. Family dot family name is coming from here, from the normal data. And active family dot family name is coming from here, from this state. So right now our active family is the first family. See here? So 0 means the first family. So the first family is active now. And then we're saying, okay, every time the family changes, then push that family to this state here. So change from 0 to something like 1 or 2, right? So this set family is changing the family. So whenever we click here, this family changing here is done by this set active family, which is right here, set active family. So it's changing this state. So instead of us using navigation routing, we use this. So don't pay a lot of attention to it. It's basically a button that checks which family we're actually looking at, and then renders information for that family. That's all it's doing. After it finishes with this, then we say, okay, if the family is in here in our state, which is active family, then we're gonna send that family to a component called family tree. So through props, as you can see here, we're gonna send that family to family tree, which is right here. So the family tree component is a basic component. It receives props, and then it renders that props. So what it does is it says props that family name. That's a family name, and then it sends the rest of the props to other components. It either sends it to parents or children. I actually created this navbar thing, but then I didn't have time, so I ignored it. So parents, right here, this component, we're sending props here. So this parents renders the parents, these parents right here. And then the children here is a component. We send in props to it. So right here, we're rendering it right here. So any questions so far how the setup is done? Any question about the setup? We're nesting things together on purpose because we want to move away from props to context API. So you know that all these nesting, sending props from here to family tree, and then sending it to children, that's really difficult, especially if you have over like 10 other components you have to pass the data through. Then that would be extremely difficult. Any question?
If you go back, if you go back to the family tree,
yeah.
You said it's gonna send 2 props. I see what it's sending, but
it's sending one prop here and then another prop here.
And where is that information coming from? The app.js? Both?
Yes, so the information is coming from app.js through props. So right here, family tree, that's the component. And then we pass in the whole family information. So the active family, that is. So whoever is active right here, we're sending that data through these props. And then in here, we're rendering the name of the family first, the active family, and then the rest of the information we're sending into either parents component or children component, right?
So when we rendering the active family, I mean like the family name, that that is gonna get both parents and children as a family.
Yes. So if we look at the data, let me zoom out for like a second. If we look at the data, so each family is an object. So this whole object right here, starting from here all the way here, is a family. And then this object has two things, actually three things. First, it has the family name, and then it has the parents, which is an array. So the parents are right here, and then it has children, which is all the way here, right? So we're passing the parents, we're passing them to the parents component, and then the children, we're passing it to the children component in here, in the family tree. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the whole object, right?
Yeah, so the whole object is the active family. So this, the whole object right here, this whole object right here, which is one family, all the way here, is the active family. So if this family changes, then the next family is the object. Then we pass in that to the family tree, the whole object. And then we're rendering, first we're rendering the family name here. And then we're sending the rest to either parents or children components, right?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So props are not easy. So that's why we're trying to avoid. But yeah, it's important to understand how that is done, so that you could use it for projects if you like. Any other question? All right, we'll move on. So now we have to convert this whole application to a context, right? Instead of using all these props, we can use context. So to use context, so right here, if we go to, let's see, go to the example. Where's a good example? These are not good examples. Let's go back. Okay. So never mind, we'll use our own. So to get started with the context API, first you have to import it, right? So we have to import it, and basically it's given to us by React. So up here in the app.js, we will just say create context. So this is a hook that helps us create basically a context information. So, and then now we have to basically kind of use this to create that kind of like an object, a bigger, a cover basically to put our app in. And then we could use that to pass the data around. So, and outside of our component right here, we have to write const family context. So you can say family context. You can name whatever you want here, but it's always good to add context so you know what this is. And then we will say create context, and this is a function right here. So create context. So now we could use this family context to basically wrap this around our app. So right here, this is where our app starts. So that's where we wrap around it. But this is outside of our components, so we have to export it right here. We have to say export. So that's the only way to bring it to our component. So what you're going to do is you use you have to understand there's two things. There is, let me just get rid of that. There is provider. I don't know why I'm using this color. There is the provider. Provider is basically the component that has the state. So component with state. So you want to put your provider in there, right? And then there is consumer. So these are two words that context API uses, provider and consumer. Provider is the where the state is located, and the consumer is another kind of like a method that you would use to consume the data, right? The state. So you will put your consumer around any app, or that was the old way, but you could use something called use context, which we will see, which is a hook to get the data from the component, the provider component, to any other component, right? So right here in our app, we have to wrap our app around this family context. So right here before the section, we'll say family context dot provider. As you can see here, when I say dot, it gives me other two options, provider and consumer. So you know that the whole thing knows that you're using context API. So this is a provider. So provider, when you say provider, then you need to provide something. So you have to use something called value. So value is whatever you want to provide for this provider. So whatever the state is the value. And you could have multiple values too. So in here, it's our state is active family. So that's where we're going to put in here, active family. And then we're going to close this. Then you have to close it, the family context. So we're going to close it here. So like this. So family context provider, just like that. So that's how you close it. You say family context dot provider. You open it with family context dot provider, and then pass your state. So now our app has basically this component has the data. So it has this active family data. So we don't need props right now. So we can get rid of the props. So let's get rid of the actually we have to put it after here. Right here. Because we want to make sure that this component has the data. So now here is the prop. We can get rid of this prop because we have the value here. We can get rid of it and then save this. So now we could go to the family tree component, which is here. Now it's giving us errors. You can see it's basically saying it's not receiving props. So in here, the family tree component, we will use something called a use context. So use context right here. So let's actually look for what use context is. Use context is a hook by React, which is right here, use context. Basically, it accepts a context object. So that's what it's saying, a value returned from create context. So the value created, so the value was what we added here. So this value right here, that's what it's expecting. And it returns the current context of value for that context. So whatever you give it here, in here, the value context, when you use this hook, use context, anywhere in your app, it doesn't matter. anywhere in your app, it will give you that value. So that's really important because your data is being carried by the use context, right? So that's really important. That's the power of context, is that you could use this use context anywhere, in any component, and then you just basically say, okay, give me the data that you have, the value you have, right? And of course, you have to import your content, your context here. So you have to import whatever you declared here, family context. All right. So in a family tree, somebody write something for me. Alex Abdul Rashid, welcome. So in family tree, we have to import the use context hook. Use context hook right there. And here outside of the component, we have to import the context itself, which is here, the family context. As you can see here, we could actually we export it from here, and we could import it in here. So we import, and we're doing this. We're putting it in here. Why are we putting it in curly bracket? Who remembers?
I think it's a hook. Maybe that's why. It's a React hook.
So in here, you can see there's two exports. There's export, normal export, and there's export default. What is the difference between those two? Who remembers? That's okay. I mean, it's been a while. So export, when you say just export, this is called named export. Okay. It's called named export. And every time you want to import this, something like this with no default, you have to put it inside curly bracket. So you have to say family context like that, and then give it whatever it's from. So it's from here, app.js, right? So no, actually that's not right. It's from, yeah, it's from app.js. Okay, so in here, but when you import, when you export default, this is called the default default export. So this is default export. Basically, you don't have to do that. You don't have to say, you don't have to put it in a curly bracket. You could just import it like this. But this is called a named, so you have to import it like that. All right, so we imported our context. Now we could use it. So using the use context and using the one we created, the context we created, now we could bring the state in here. So we could just say something like const family. We could put it in a variable called family. You can name whatever you want, and then use the hook, use context, and then I think I'm spelling it, context. And then inside here, you put the context you created. So that would be your state. So now we can actually use that. So let's actually get rid of this for a minute. So we can actually put something there and get rid of this for now. This for now. So now we could actually console log this. Let's see if this brings our state. Family. We don't have any other logs, so it should be fine. So it brought an object here. The object has children, it has parents, and that's what we were expecting, and a family name. So that's what we were expecting, right? So this is how you use context. You bring in the context, use context. You import whatever context you created in the provider component, which is right here. Not that one. Provide here, and then you have to wrap the context provider around the main component. And then after that, you have to pass the value, which is the state, whatever you want to pass. Whatever you were passing as a prop here, you pass it here. Any question about how we did that?
why do we have a prop again right here?
Where?
32, line 32.
We don't have a prop, line 32. Where's the prop? We have a variable, basically saying if basically it's coming from here. So it's saying if the family active, if we have an active family, then we're saying and also render the component called family tree. That's basically what it's saying. It's not a prop.
Okay.
Yeah. So here you're saying like we have active family, and then render that family basically in here. But we actually removed the prop from here. Any other question? Okay. So now we have our state in here, which is good. Now we have to pass it to, we have to send it to other components. So actually we have to render the name here. So let's do that. So the family name. So that would be family dot the family name. Yeah.
You need to keep the props up there, line 7, or should you remove that one?
Yeah, you can remove it. You don't need it. You can remove it. Yeah, you don't need it anymore props. So now nothing is gonna render now because we still have a problem with we didn't send any data to either the parents or children. So that's why it's giving us issues. So the parents and children, we don't have to send any props to them right now. We could just go to them and then use the use context to render. But I'm going to show you how to do in the old way. So in case you see it in an app, you know how to do that. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that in the parents. So, and then the children, we're going to use the context, the use context, the usual one that we just learned. So in the parents here, it's expecting a prop, as you can see here. It wants to loop through that prop, which is the parents, but it doesn't have the prop. So what are we going to do is we're going to use the old way. So there was an old way of using props, which is the consumer, right? So the consumer I was telling you about, using the consumer and wrapping the consumer around the app is sort of like the old way of doing it, right? So we're going to do that. And then I'm going to show you how to do you already saw how to do the new way, which is using the use context, creating a variable, importing the data, and then just using that data here. Usually we call here value because you want to match with whatever you passed here. But for the sake of clarity, we just call it family. So in here, to show you the old way of doing it, first what we're gonna do is in here, we're gonna say you have to import the context we created anyways. So you have to say import family context. And then here from app. Okay. And then within here, inside the section, we're going to use the consumer. So we're going to say family context, not context dot consumer, and then we have to wrap it. So we have to go here and say family context consumer, like that. Okay, so when you do this, when you use consumer, you have to put a function inside it. So that function is what renders. So if you don't have a function, it will not work. So before we even reach this part of mapping over the data, we have to use a function here. So to use a function, we have to actually use that. Let's say it's kind of like an anonymous function. So we're just gonna no, it's arrow function. I mean, we're gonna say family arrow function, and then we're gonna render whatever this sign is basically a hidden return. Basically, if you see that, it's a hidden return. And now we just have to close this function. So it's inside here. So we have to do that and then that, right? So we're inside a function. And this family here is the data. So the data, the family data is this name. So now instead of props, we're going to change it to family. Like that. So that should work. So this is the old way of doing it, is by using the consumer, wrapping your data around a function, an arrow function, and then using the name of the function as the data. So this will give you the data, right? So now hopefully it should render. If we don't have any, still have an error because of the children. Let's get rid of the children here for a minute. Okay, so the parents are rendered. So if you click any of them, they're rendered. So that's awesome. So the parents is good. So if you ever see this, if you ever see consumer, this is how it's set up. If you ever want to use it, this is how it's set up. So we're not going to use this again in anything. So even if you're doing a project or something like that, don't use the consumer. Just use the use context hook. So let's bring back the children. Okay. The children, we're going to use the same thing we use in family tree, bring in the use context. Who can walk me through what we just did in the family tree? So the first step is bringing in the use context. What else do we need to do?
You're gonna import. No, you already import.
Import what?
Export the name.
You're gonna import the name export.
The name export. So right here. So the first context we created, which is the one that has all the data, the state. So we're gonna import that. Import family context. You can name it whatever you want when you're creating it from app. So now we have that. What is the next thing we need to do to use the data?
You're gonna wrap.
You can look at here if you want.
Create the variable.
So you have to create a variable for it, right? So I'm gonna give you steps. So step one, bring in the use context hook. Step two is here. Step two, import the parent context data state, right? From app.js or whatever you have it from app.js. Okay, and then the third step is this. Step three is create a variable to keep the data from the parent context, right? Using use context. So like this. So you can name whatever you want here, but you have to use context and then give it the data from the other component. So that's it. So, and then the last step is to use that data. So step 4 is use the data in the above variable, right? So whatever way you want to use it. If it's an array of objects, then loop through it. If it's just object, just use it like this right here. Whatever the name here is, dot, whatever you want to grab from it, or you could actually use a prop too. I mean, you could use it together. You don't have to use either the context API or props. So if you want to pass props here, you could do it. You could say here parents, and then pass the family dot parents here, which is coming from the use context. So you could mix and match if you like. Okay, so that's the last step. So in children, we're doing those steps now. So step 1, we imported use context. Step 2, step 3 is creating the variable. So let's say we're gonna call it here. We could call it children if we want. Doesn't matter what do you want to call it. It might actually say here, it's going to give us an error. It's going to say family, and you have children here and you have children here. So it's going to give us an error. So we're going to call it here value. So what do we do here?
You're gonna say family context.
We're going to say family context. Is that it?
No, you're gonna put the value. You say value, and then assign it to a value.
Assign it to a value here.
Oh, you already have the value.
Yeah.
Value.
So here is the steps. Step 1 is this, and we bring it in. Step 2 is this. We did this. Step 3 is here. What do
use
The use context.
Okay, use context. So write down those steps so that next time you could use it, and it will help you a lot, especially if you're doing the homework context. So use context is a function, and we put the data inside the use context. If we actually console log this, you should have the children data, but it's giving us error from here, so we have to correct here. So now this value, we could use it instead of these props. We can get rid of the props. We could just use this value here. So we're going to say value instead of props, and that should work fine. Right? So now if we go to our app, we should show the children too. Okay. So we use the use context. We bring in the data from the app we declared, which is the app.js. And then we created a variable, and we put the data inside use context function. And then we just use this value to either map through things or whatever way you want to use it. So you have to know what this data is. So usually console log it if it's an array. So this is kind of like the rule. So rule for consuming data is number 1, if it's array of objects, then loop through. If it's and 2 is if it's just one object, you can just you can use dot notation or bracket notation, bracket to select the data. So you could just say something like family dot, and just give it example, i.e. family dot family name. So that will be, if it's just an object, then that's how you use it. Let me make this wrap. Okay, that's kind of like the rule for consuming data. If it's on objects, array of objects, then you have to loop through it, because there's no way to select it. You either have to say, you have to target it by index, or you have to loop through it. Those 2 ways. If it's just one object, you don't have to worry about it. You could just say the name of the object dot whatever, and then it will give you the data.
And that you're referring the value, right?
Yeah, the value, yeah. So the value now is a array of objects. So if we actually console log it, value here, save it. Hopefully we don't have any other console logs anywhere. Then we can just check it. So this is our console log. No, that's not the correct console log. Children. Yeah, that's the correct console log. So if we say here dot children, that's what we're looking for. And we check here. This is the one we're looking for. It's an array of objects. This is how you know array of objects is you have the array sign here, and then you have multiple objects inside it. And then you know that now it's time to loop through it. If you have only one object, let's say you have like one object like this. So let's say we put here like 0. That means the first object like this. This is one object here. Then what you could do is you could just say dot name. So right here we could just say dot name, and that will give us the name. We don't have to loop through it. So as you can see, run trailing. Okay, that's kind of like the rule for looping through stuff. Any question? We're essentially done with the setup. Any question? So what I would usually do is I will watch a couple of videos about context API. So go to YouTube or something like that, watch like 1 or 2 videos about what context API is, and just only context API. Don't worry about like Redux or stuff like that, because we're gonna learn Redux, and it's gonna be very useful technology for you in the future. But now just focus on context API. If somebody talks about something like Redux or Redux reducer patterns and things like that, just ignore that, skip it. So one of the rules for this school is don't learn something that you're not learning yet. So don't even look at it. It's going to confuse you, and then you're just going to keep, worrying about that thing. So focus on basically what we're learning today. And then you'll be good, inshallah. So let me know if you have any question. I'm going to go through. Let's see if we cover all the objectives. So yeah.
So the context API waxay ku siinaysaa miya everything that's in the data ma available ku noqonaysa mise marka create context API as maysato.
So yeah, so you have to use the create the context API. This method that's given to us by React, you put that you bring that in, you create a variable for it, and then you import it here. So this is how you use it. You say family context, which is whatever you created here. You can name whatever you want this. And then you say provider. So that provider indicates that you're about to give this a data, a state or whatever information. So here is the information that you give it, the value. And from here on, you could just import this to any component, and then use the use context hook, this one, use context hook, to consume that data basically. So you don't have to pass it to any other component. You could go to any component and use that, import the data, and you're good to go. Right? So that's the power of it. You don't have to pass it to any other component. But you have to make sure that it has the provider here. And the provider has to be wrapped around a component that has all the components. So this component, the family tree, has all the components. So it has the children component, which is right here, children component. It has the parent components. So you have to wrap it around a component that has everything. Sometimes people, what they do is they go to index.js, and then they wrap the provider here. So they say here, family context.provider, like that here. And then you have to pass the value here, right? And then they wrap. So now you know that it doesn't matter where you go, still you have the provider, right? So now we're not using it, so we can just get rid of it. So it's like the router. So remember the router we were using, we have to put it around this this component. So it's like that. What did I delete? Let's go. Any question?
Mark,
Uh,
right now, we're getting the data through the just like the data is there. What about if you're receiving the data from API? Is the same thing?
Same thing. So if you're receiving data from API, you put it in one of the components like the app.js. So usually you will put the data here, use effect, and then you pass it a callback function. Sorry, messed it up. A callback function here. So inside here is where you put your API, right? So here we put the empty array, things like that. Yeah, and then here you put your API. So Axio, everything you want, get, and then when you do that, you set it to you say set to a family right here, like your state, and then you pass the data from the API here, and then now the data from the API goes to your state, and then you use the same thing, and then you just say value, and then you set it to your state. So it doesn't change because you always have to put the data that comes from the API, you have to send it to your state, right? So that will not change. Does that make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So yeah, so it will not change. It's still, you have to put the data from the API, you have to put it in here in the value. All right, any other question? All right, let me see if we covered everything. Describe what context API is and the problem it solves. Provide data to a component tree with the context provider. So we did that right here. Context provider, it's right here. And then consume that data from a context object in a nested component, which we did. So these are the nested components. So this is one component, and children is nested under the family tree. So we did that too. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's look at the assignment. So assignment is a shopping cart app. Let's see. So this one you'll be using the context API. You're going to be converting a existing app with a props to context API. So that would be your job. So now if we go to the app.js, you will see that it has some routing right here. It has a state here. It has these components, products. It has the shopping cart. So these are components. So you see here. So these are the components that you have. So now you have to pass the data, which is the data is here. So this is the data, shopping data. And it's already set for you, so you don't have to worry about it. So we set up the data for you and we put it in the state. So now you have to use context API to pass down the data to other components instead of props. So that'll be your job. Any question?
So basically, passing the API context to the other components, right?
Yeah. So this one is a data from a file. So right here, this data, but it's in this state right here. So now what you're gonna do is you're just gonna pass it to you're gonna pass it to these components. So now, as you can see here, we're passing it through props. As you can see here, through props, and this one is through props. So now we want to get rid of the props and then pass it through the context API. Okay. And then consume it here. So we go here, products. This is product, products. You consume it here instead of this props. You get rid of it. You use context, import the data, and then instead of looping through here through props, create a variable and then loop through that way.
Okay.
Any question?
Mahal,
Ah,
should you see the routes because of the navigation?
yeah. Yeah, so the routes, don't worry about the routes. Still, you have to wrap it around the whole thing. So, so the navigation, the products, and the shopping, all of them, you have to wrap your provider on them. So, you have a specific question about the navigation?
No, I mean like we're gonna leave them. We're gonna change only the props, right?
Yeah, only the props. That's all you're changing. And also you're changing the, if we go to here, you're changing these. So you're changing the where it says props to a value from the
Yeah.
context API. So that's what you're changing. And here there's props being passed here. You could either do this or you could leave it the way it is. This is a nested component, but I would say do it, get rid of these props, and then go to the component product, and then consume the data through there. So you have to look through it. And read through the README. It will help you a lot. So steps here, MVP, step 1. So this would be add item functionality. And then step 2 is create a product context. Step 3 is provide data with a product context. And then step 4 will be consuming data with what's the same. Or providing one down. This one's consuming. And then the last, the 5th step is create a cart context. So this, you could create a multiple context. You don't have to create a one. So cart context, and then provide that, and then consume it. And then the stretch, the final stretch is all these steps. So you could read through it, see if you could do it. Final stretch. So the final stretch does mean this is a stretch. The stretch is here. The final stretch means this is the last step, right? Should have changed that. So this will step, okay. So this is step 7. I should write the last step here. It confuses people. Any question?
So the app is working even like this with the props is working as functional, then we change it.
Yeah, we're just gonna change the props to consumer and the context API. Yeah, it's working now. It's fully working. It has some. There's one functionality missing, which is the this method adding this adding item. So you cannot add items. So just make sure that you work on that one and then fix that one. But the rest is working.
Okay. Can you share the code sandbox?
Yeah. That's on box. Let's go. Let's copy all the way here. All right. Any other question? All right, I'll let you guys go. Good luck with the assignment.
Thank you.
Yeah, make sure to send it as soon as you can. don't let things pile up. Otherwise, it's gonna feel really tough, especially with these state management systems. Redux is going to be one of the hardest things you will do in React. So don't let things reach to Redux. Make sure you get rid of these and also the Spring project, all that stuff. So you don't have to worry about that when you reach here. And you could focus on just Redux and understand it. So it's going to be very challenging to understand, but make sure you know get rid of everything before that, inshallah. So take care, inshallah. See you guys next time. Assalamu alaikum.